Hi guys, it's Christina here. Um, Checking in today. It's VLC day 22. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I'll just double check. No, 23. So it's VLC day 23. Um, so I'm checking in. I did mention in my last vlog that I was wearing the consequences of doing the wrong thing and eating some chocolate cake. So I had gained 500 grams, which for the US ladies is 1.1 pounds. And so yesterday was much better, and I was able to drop 300 of that 500 grams. So that's 0.10 pounds. So I still have a little bit of that 500 grams to take off, but good to see that I'm over halfway there. So hopefully that'll be gone tomorrow. And I wanted to let you know what my total loss is for this round so far. So far I've lost 6 kilos this round. That's 13, can't read my own writing, 13.11 pounds. Yeah, something like that. So it's 13 plus pounds this round. So some of that weight is weight that I had gained over the Christmas New Year's period. And then some of that weight is new weight that I'm taking off of my total weight. So I wanted to talk a bit today because I've got a few people that have recently joined or have subscribed to my blog. So I wanted to do a quick rundown about what has happened with me and what kind of brought me to HCG. I have, like many of you, been overweight most of my life, probably from the teen years on. It's funny, when I think about it, I look at the photos of when I was a teen and I think, now I look at the photos and go, well, if only I had stayed that weight, I would have been fine. But back then, I felt like I was huge. I felt like I was this humongous person that was not worthy of people shouldn't have to look at me. But I look at the photos now and I go, what was I thinking? That, I was bigger than most of the other girls, but I wasn't to the point where, like, I thought in my mind. I wasn't at the point that of how big I thought I actually was. And I'm sure many of you probably had that sort of experience where you, as a teenager, you think that you're this, but then you look back now at photos and you look and you go, I really wasn't. My perception was so squiff. It wasn't a true, accurate perception of me. So I was overweight in sort of high school, late high school, and then college, which is the year 11 and 12, and then, of course, university. I was overweight for all those, and it just kind of continued. But for the last 7 years of having my kids, I've looked back over my pregnancy records, and I've been within the same 10 to 20 kilo range. I've not gone over it much and not come under it. I haven't tried actively a lot to lose weight. Like, I haven't tried a whole heap of diets. I have tried bits and pieces here and there. But for the last probably 4 or 5 years, I learnt more about whole foods and natural health and medicine and so on. So I had been trying a bit more then, but life gets in its way. Like when you have 7 babies in 10 years, like I have, you can't really accurately gauge your weight because you're either pregnant or you're breastfeeding, and there wasn't a lot of time in between to go, right, I'm taking this time off to get my weight down. Although I did try and be more active and things like that. And so, yeah, it just kind of stayed the same. I did occasionally lose quite a bit, particularly after baby number 6 when we had Xavier. It was at that stage that I had read a lot about GAPS, and my husband suffers from severe irritable bowel syndrome. And so we decided then, after he was born, that we would take the plunge into doing gaps and see what sort of results we could get for him. And we did that really strictly for 8 months. And we were doing so well. I lost easily lost 20 kilos, which is around 40, 50 pounds, just by eating as much fat as I could, and being really strict with all the other facets of gaps. And that was going really well for me, and I would have absolutely kept doing it, but I fell pregnant with baby number 7. And I was doing gaps at the start of that pregnancy and would have continued, but then at 7 weeks, I started bleeding. I had, and I miscarried one of the twins. We didn't know we had twins at the time. We just thought that was it, that we had miscarried the whole pregnancy. And so children putting their heads in the door. Can you shut the door, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we had thought that we had lost the whole pregnancy. I remember specifically sitting in the toilet and just holding what was our baby at the time in my hands, and it was a very devastating moment. And then going to the hospital and there being a lot of confusion because they tested my HCG levels at the time, and they were really, really high. They were really high for a normal pregnancy, and they were even more high for someone who was having a miscarriage. And so it took probably a good 2 weeks to find out that we were still pregnant. And during that time, I still had bleeding. It was bizarre because it was like, do I rejoice that I'm still pregnant or do I not? Because I don't have any answers about whether I'm going to keep this pregnancy, whether it's going to continue or whether I'm going to continue bleeding and I'm just going to lose the baby. And it wasn't until we'd done a number of tests that we found out that we actually did have twins, and that was the reason for the high HCG results. And yeah, it was just a really confusing time. And then as the pregnancy continued, I had another 10 bleeds. So every time I had a bleed, it was a rush to the hospital to check that we still had a live baby. And it was a really traumatizing sort of experience of sitting there waiting to see. Because, you know, at that stage, you can't feel if your baby's moving. So you have no reassurance until the Doppler says that there's a heartbeat, and if they can't find the heartbeat on the Doppler, which they couldn't a number of times, then they go to the ultrasound scan, and then you finally see your baby and you can breathe easy. But I remember sitting there in the waiting room a few times with all of these heavily pregnant women, and actually one time somebody I knew came in when they were supporting their daughter who was having a baby, and they said, "Oh, are you having another one?" And I'm kind of like, I don't know if I'm having another baby. I might. I was pregnant yesterday, but today I'm checking to see if I have a live baby still. So I don't really know how to answer that question, and I'm trying not to break down and cry at the same time and let people know how worried I am. Anyway, so then it continued, and at 20 weeks they discovered that I had placenta previa. Before that, they had sort of said your placenta is low-lying. But at 20 weeks, when they did the proper scan, that's when they gave the diagnosis of placenta previa. And at that point, my placenta was only just covering the cervix. So they were really hopeful that it would move up out of the way and would not be an issue. And then as the pregnancy continued, I had bleeding again until 38 weeks. At 32 weeks, they did another scan, and they discovered that my placenta hadn't moved up, it had actually moved down the other way. And so it was now completely covering my cervix, and there was a possibility that it was covering my old C-section scar that I had had with my first baby. And so then at that point, they started talking about, from then on, I wasn't allowed to leave town. I had to have an emergency plan to be able to get to the hospital very, very quickly if a major bleed happened. And they booked me in for my C-section delivery date at 37 weeks. Yeah, in the hope that they would avoid having an emergency situation, and that I would make it to my planned C-section date, and then it would all be, they'd be in a controlled situation. Anyway, at 36 weeks, I had a placental abruption. So I was at home with the children, the 6 children at the time, on my own, and my husband was at TAFE, which is probably about a half an hour walk down the road, a 5-minute drive. And so, but he didn't drive, so he just had legs. And so he was at TAFE, and when I had started bleeding, and so one of my children rushed over to get the neighbour to come and watch them, while another child gave me the phone, and another one gave me the computer. So I was on the phone to the ambulance, and I was Facebook messaging my husband to say I was bleeding, he needed to come home quickly. That was it. That was all the information I was able to get to him, was I'm bleeding, come home. And I was able to also Facebook message a friend of mine to come and look after my children. And she quickly stuck all of her children in the car and rushed over here. And the ambulance came, and I was still bleeding. Blood was just pouring out. Like, I was sitting on the toilet, and it was like I was peeing blood. It was coming out that quickly. And then I went to, I did, you know, the thing that women do. We don't think about, you know, we're dying. We think about, I'm going to get blood on the carpet. Anyway, so I'm going to tell you the thought that I had. I was in the toilet room, and then there's carpet. There's kind of like, you know, the toilet room's here, and then the bathroom's here, and then there's carpet. So I kind of did this thing where I jumped from the toilet room into the bathroom, because I figured cleaning up blood off of the tiles would be much easier than if I got any on the carpet. And so I'm in the bathroom talking to the ambulance lady, and she's saying to me, you need to sit down. I'm like, but I hadn't actually mopped the floor that day. The floor was really dirty. It was one of my jobs to do. It was on my to-do list, and I hadn't mopped the floor. And I'm like, okay, well, I can sit on the bath. And she's like, no. You need to really sit on the floor. I'm like, but the floor's dirty. She said, oh, put something down on it so you can sit. I just don't want you to pass out and, like, you know, hit your head or anything. So I'm grabbing a towel, putting it on the floor, sitting on the floor going, oh my Lord, this is so dirty. I don't want the ambulance in here seeing my dirty floor. Anyway, they came, blood still coming out. They put in an IV, chucked me in the back of their ambulance. My husband arrived home running. The ambulance had actually drove past him. He could hear the sirens as he was running home. And my friend pulled up in her car just as the ambulance was taking me. And sitting in the back of the ambulance, I started contracting, and my daughter was in breech, and I knew the placenta was coming first, and I just kind of said to the ambulance guy, if I start giving birth, reach in, grab her feet, and pull her out. And he's like, go faster, to the other driver. And anyway, so we got in, and they took me straight up to theatre, and we went into the OR. And there was a number of funny things that happened in there. In amongst all of the seriousness of, I hope my baby doesn't die, and I hope I don't die, and all of that, they had me on the bed, and they're quickly trying to get my clothes off and get everything organised. And because they were giving me a general, they were putting me to sleep, they had to do everything else without anaesthetic, because they couldn't risk me being under for so long that she would be born sleeping, and they would have to resuscitate her and leave her without oxygen for too long. And so what they did, they're waxing me. The guys, they're all rushing around me because it's an emergency. And there's one guy down the bottom half of me, and he just starts waxing me without telling me what he's doing. It's just ripping. And then there's this other moment where, you know, they scan with the Doppler to check for my baby's heartbeat. And the lady couldn't find the heartbeat, and the whole room is like dead silent. Everybody's freaking out. And then I said, no, she's in breech. Check the other way. Check somewhere else. She's in breech. And then they did check, and they found her heartbeat, and it was like this. The whole room is like a sigh of relief. And so they're moving very quickly to get me organised for the C-section, and the anaesthetist is putting the gas mask over my face, and I'd eaten that day, so he's saying to me, I'm going to put my hand on your throat so that, no food can come back up and choke you. But it's going to feel like I'm strangling you. And so I'm like, okay, just do it. Just get me asleep, get my baby out. And so they put me to sleep. And for me, that was the last I knew of it for the next 6 days. What had happened is that they got Marcella out, and she needed a little bit of assistance, breathing and stuff, because she was a little bit early. But I needed a whole lot of assistance. What had actually happened was that I didn't just have placenta previa, I had also developed placenta Accreta, which is the worst type of Accreta you can have. And Accreta is where the placenta grows through the uterus, and it can happen when you have a scar or for a whole number of other reasons. C-sections is just one of the reasons you can get them. IUDs is quite commonly, it can happen quite commonly if you've used IUDs and then gotten pregnant as well, because of the scar tissue within the uterus. And so what had happened was that my placenta had gone through my old C-section scar and also through my cervix. And it had pretty much eaten through both of those, and then it had attached to my urethra and my bladder, and as well as some of the major blood vessels in the area. So because they didn't know that when they went in, they were not expecting it. They thought that I had some Accreta, and so what they did first was that they performed a partial hysterectomy, where they took the top half of my uterus and removed that, just leaving the cervix intact. And that's all they took during that surgery. And from the doctor, when he talked to me later about it, he said I was bleeding so much that he couldn't actually see what was going on. And so the only tool that he had was his hands. So he was feeling with his hands to try and figure out what was placenta and what was me. And so he took that part of me, and then they closed me up and took me to ICU. And then in ICU, they kept testing my blood levels, and they kept going down. So that told them that there was something else going on. They took me back to theatre, reopened my C-section wound, and then discovered that my placenta had actually gone through the cervix. So in that operation, they then took out my cervix, closed me up, and put me back in ICU. Back in ICU, they then discovered that I was still bleeding, and still my blood levels were still going down. At that point, they then took me back to theatre, and during another 2 situations where I went back to theatre again and again, they opened me up and discovered that it was through my urethra and through my bladder and through the blood vessels. And yeah, so it was a number of operations. They had to cut open my groin and put a camera inside to find things. But I had hemorrhaged so much that I had lost 64 litres of blood. Well, I had to have 64 litres of blood replaced, which is 134 units of blood. Using all of the O-negative blood in my state, you might be able to see there's one of my scars and there is the other one. They're fading quite a bit now, but that's where I had 2 giant needles in my neck, and they were pouring blood into them directly into my heart, as well as ones that I still have some scars all over my arms where they were putting in blood that way as well. And so my husband was outside. For that whole time, for 6 days, I was on life support. And after the first operation, my first operation for the C-section was 9 hours long. My husband was waiting outside to find out whether I would live. And at the end of it, they couldn't tell him. They didn't know. They just said, all you can do is go home now, and we're working our best, and we'll keep her monitored and update you with what's going on. And then he got home. He finally got all of the children settled into bed at like 11 o'clock at night. He'd been asleep for an hour when a police officer came and woke him up in bed. He was actually literally at the end of our bed shaking his foot to wake him up because he needed to call the hospital. They told him they weren't sure that I would live and that he should come in and say goodbye. Hello, child. Hello. My miracle baby has just walked in totally naked. Hopefully she'll walk back out to Dad now. Yeah, so it took a long time. It took day 6. I woke up. While I was on life support, they had actually brought Marcella down and put her on my chest, and took photos of her so that my family would have memories of me, and Marcella would have something to look back on should I die. I was very lucky to survive, and that for me it's a pivotal moment for a number of things. From that point, I left hospital at 110 kilos, like I've mentioned in some of my other videos, and I had to sort of rebuild my physical strength because I had none. I was totally knocked for a 6. I couldn't even walk up the stairs to get in my house. It was a horrible experience for so many reasons, but one major one was that having all of your independence taken away, like not even being able to go to the toilet on your own. I mean, I had a bladder bag for 8 weeks, so I couldn't go to the toilet. And then afterwards, because of all of the trauma, anytime I went to the toilet and did number 2, blood would come rushing out. And I had blood pooling inside my stomach, and it was just a really long time recovering and a long time healing. But it was also very depressing for me. Having all of the things that you take for granted. Like, I remember being so hungry that I really was craving a steak, and wanted nothing more than to have a steak. And I just no one would really cook it for me. Like, my husband tried, but he's not a very good cook. And so I used the morphine tablets that I had, and I took a couple of doses of morphine so that I could stand in the kitchen long enough to cook myself a steak, because it was so painful. It was a really challenging time, and that stemmed depression for me. I was depressed about having all of your power taken away, having all of that stuff happen, but then also having my ability to have more children was taken away, and I couldn't breastfeed, and I couldn't do all of these things that as a mother you should be able to do. And so it was a really depressing time, and I showed on my Facebook a photo of this candy bar that I used to try and eat every day because I liked them, and they have popping candy in them, and so it would crackle in the back of my throat, and for that moment in time I would be happy for a little bit, and so that little weapon of choice, I called it my weapon of choice to kill myself, would make me happy for a little bit, but also make me gain weight, which was my goal. My goal was kind of like to die from this, to die from obesity-related illness, because it's kind of socially okay, and my children wouldn't think that I had left them behind. It would just be a much nicer sort of death for my family, in my mind. Like, depression does that to you. Things that you normally think in your mind are reasonable were so not. And so, yeah, that was my weapon of choice, and I kind of gained 30 kilos after coming out of hospital. So then somebody introduced me to HCG, which I'm super glad about, because you lose so quickly, you feel like you're actually getting somewhere and you're gaining things back. It's not like when you watch The Biggest Loser and you see those poor people and they look like they're being tortured. It's not like that. You actually, you learn so much about yourself when you're doing it, because you learn, when you stick food in your mouth, why you stick food in your mouth, and then you can make active choices when you're off HCG. Am I going to do that? Is it worth it? Is eating that candy bar worth the calories? Do I really like it that much, or would I rather eat something that I actually do like? And so it's been a huge learning curve for me, learning all these little nuances about myself and about my eating habits, even to the point of just like, tasting a recipe as you cook it. Like, how much food do I actually stick in my mouth when I'm actually tasting it, to test whether things are good or not. Does it need more flavoring? Which I hadn't really thought about when I thought about eating before. But I also found that I couldn't stick to, at this point, I couldn't commit to something like GAPS, because it's 2 years of eating a particular way, and I just didn't have it in me to do that. But I could do 43 days. 43 days was doable. I could say for 43 days, that's all. For 43 days, I'm going to do this. And I had no commitment afterwards that I would continue to do it or anything, but I would give it a try. Excuse me. And so I did. And I had great results, and I could see the weight coming off. Yeah, and I could see that I was getting my life back, and I had got to that frame of mind before starting HCG, of starting to exercise and wanting to get my life back on track, and yeah, so this was a tool that is helping me do that. So there, I think that's about it. I've gone for a really long time. I hope it wasn't boring, but I wanted to give a brief explanation for people that have only just started watching me, or haven't had the opportunity to read my blog, telling the whole story. I mean, that's only a short version of the story. There's so much more to it. But yeah, that's it for me today, and I'll check in soon. Okay, bye.